Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. For today's video, I'm going to create some hand-stamped gift tags, but I'm also going to talk about finding embellishments in unique places. So I have 3 daughters. 2 of them still live at home, and one of them was cleaning up her nail supplies the other day, and she had these containers with these really cool and unique different gems and studs that you can add to your nails when you're creating them. And I thought they would be really cool for embellishments on different stamped images. I'm sorry for the video quality. I don't know why the camera didn't want to focus on what I was actually showing you and only focused on the background. But in each one of these containers, there is about 12 different gems of they're really tiny. They're not as big as the ones that we typically use for cards. And I just thought they would be fun to use. So I'm going to use this Holiday Images stamp set. I'm going to use some framed tag dies. I've used these in my previous video when I was doing some die cut tags. This is the time of year where we're getting so close to Christmas, so I like to still get creative, but I like to do it with smaller projects, so it's not as intimidating. I'm using 3 different colors of distress ink here. I'm using Bundled Sage, Peeled Paint, and Forest Moss, and I'm going to start with the tree stamp. I'm stamping it with the lightest color first, and I'm going to create kind of an ombre look here. So I did the entire tree with that Bundled Sage, and I'm doing all of the colors stamped twice just to make sure to get lots of detail. For the next color, I'm doing Peeled Paint, and I only did about 2/3 of the tree, and then I used an ink blending brush just to kind of soften that top line there and make sure that I didn't get a harsh line when I went and stamped it. The last color that I'm using is the Forest Moss, and I'm doing that same thing, but I'm only doing the bottom third of the tree, stamping or putting the ink on it, and then using that ink blending brush just to buffer that line a little bit, make sure I don't have a nice harsh line. And it's just an easy way to get a stamped image that has some great color gradation to it. Once that image is completely stamped, I'm taking my gold Sharpie marker and I'm just going around all of the edges, just adding a very simple gold edge to it. It's one of those things that's very subtle, but I just really like how it frames and finishes the whole piece off. I'm choosing one of the gems from this set here. These ones are little kind of colored pearls that have a gold rim around them. And I think they're going to be perfect to look like ornaments on this little tree. I also have a little tiny star embellishment that I'm going to put at the top of that tree. I'm using a jewel picker to pick up all of these pieces. The hardest part of this entire thing is the fact that when you dump these things out of the containers, for some reason they all want to land on the dome side. So you have to flip them all over. Again, that's the hardest part. First world problems. Easy enough to flip them over. Because a lot of these gems are so tiny, they do take a little bit to get used to learning how to flip them over though. Because all of these little pearl pieces are different colors, I'm just trying to make sure that I don't have the same colors beside each other. And right there, I put down 2 greens close to each other, not realizing until I had patted in the glue. And I'm using some Barely Art glue in a really fine tipped bottle. This way I can get really small amounts of glue exactly where I want them. The nice thing about this glue is it dries nice and clear. So even if I get a little bit on the outside, you're not going to see it once it's totally dried. And I do typically like to put enough glue that I kind of have a rim around the embellishment. I find it kind of holds it in place. The last step here is to add a gold cord to the top of that tag, and it's done. You could add a to and from stamp on there if you want. I'm trying to keep these as simple as possible. Basically, I wanted to get this idea out of my head. I thought it would look so cool, and I'm really happy with how they look. And if I have a to and from stamp, I don't know where it is. And right now, I don't really want to spend the time looking for it, but I actually don't think I have one. So I'm going to do the same technique for this little holly sprig that I did for the trees. I'm stamping with Bundled Sage, and then I'm just using my peeled paint around the edges of the stamp so that I get a lighter area in the center and a darker area around the outsides. Just again, a simple way to get some color variation in there without taking the time to do a lot of ink blending. Once again, I'm going around the edges of that tag with that gold Sharpie marker. Of the framed tag die set, this is the medium size tag. There's 3 different sizes in that set. The small one was just a little bit too small for this stamped image, and the big one was just too big. So the next embellishment that I'm using is, these are tiny, tiny little rhinestones, but there's some really pretty red ones in there. So I'm using the red ones from this set to use as the holly berries. Now, with the way my mat is completely stained here, it's really hard to see the gems from that mat, but there's a variety of different colors in here. I'm only picking out the red ones, but they make a really, really pretty berry on this holly sprig. The jewel picker that I'm using has enough stick to put that gem into the glue, and then the glue basically holds it, and I can easily take that jewel picker off, so it's not too strong of a stick to it. I took some time there to take all of the red ones out and put them right way on my mat so that it makes it a lot easier to pick them out and add them to this holly branch here. Another way you could do this if you didn't want to use little tiny gems would be to use some red stickles. It has some nice glitter to it and nice sparkle to it. I just loved these little tiny embellishments and really wanted to find different ways to use them. I always love finding craft supplies or things to use with crafting in unique and different ways. I often will look at or in through dollar stores just to kind of see what's there and just trying to find different ways of using things that are not really the way they're meant to be used. I love the sparkle those tiny rhinestones give that holly branch there, and you wouldn't get that same effect from the main card embellishments that we have available to us because they're a lot bigger. They're not the right proportion for that particular stamp, and they just have a bit of a different sparkle. For the next tag, I'm using the round base from one of the Festive ornament dies, and I also have the hangy part of the ornament die cut as well. I'm using a silver Sharpie marker and just going around the edges. When it comes to different shapes like these circles, I like to do that edging first, so if I happen to screw it up, I can easily just grab another die cut piece. I don't have to have a completed part or a completed stamped and finished piece that I accidentally mess up. Just because sometimes that Sharpie marker or that anytime you're doing markers can kind of jump off of that edge, easiest to do it first. So I'm doing a wreath next, and I'm going to use that same peeled paint and forest moss. Again, I stamped the entire thing with the peeled paint, and then I went around the edges of the wreath with the forest moss just to get a little bit of shading there. For the first embellishment I'm using on this wreath is a little resin bow. My daughter had some resin bows that she was adding to her nails, and in the set that she got, they had black and they had white, and I thought the white one would look really, really pretty on a tiny wreath stamp, and I just happened to have this wreath stamp that it was perfect for. And then for the embellishments on the wreath, I'm using just some simple white pearls. It ties in really nicely with the white bow. I think it would look really, really pretty as well in just some rhinestones, or even those same red rhinestones that I used with the holly. I used them all up with the holly, so I didn't have them to use for this. But the nice thing about something like this is you can basically make it what you want it. You can use whatever colors you're wanting. And I really love how simple and elegant just that green and white cold or color scheme with the silver edge looks. The next tag I'm doing is a snowflake tag. This same stamp set that I've been using has so many different holiday images, and I just love snowflakes this time of year. I don't necessarily love snow, but doing things with winter themes, I really love them. So I'm stamping it with some Versamark ink, and then I'm embossing it with silver embossing powder. This is one of the tags that I already had the silver around the edge, so the silver embossing powder would look really, really nice with it. You could also use like a sparkle or a glitter embossing powder. That would look really pretty as well. Once I have any excess powder rubbed off from there, I'm taking my embossing tool and melting that powder. I really need to remember to use my embossing powder tool on my pieces before I actually stamp them. For some reason, it's a step that I always forget. So once I have that embossed, I put the hangy piece on the top of the ornament to let that glue dry. And I have some gems here that are silver that have just a tiny little bit of a holographic color glint to them. I'm adding just a few, I'm putting them on the center, plus a little bit on some of the little stems of the snowflake. I didn't want to overdo it with the sparkles on here. You could easily go crazy. One of these sets also has some teardrop shaped ones that you could add to this snowflake as well. I just ended up using the round ones and keeping things very, very simple. And then the last thing I did, I'm using that same silver Sharpie to color the hangy top on the top of the ornament. I could have die cut it with silver cardstock, but by doing the Sharpie on there, I can make sure that it matches the silver around the rim very easily. And you can see how quick and easy these tags are to put together. They don't take a lot of time, but it's a great way in a busy season to get a little bit of creativity. The last tag that I'm making is using this Holiday Florals set from Simon Says Stamp. I recently did an unboxing where I had purchased one of their crafty parcels and was sharing what was in it and was amazed at all the things that are in it. There's a few holiday things in there that I'm trying to use before the holidays just so that I have a little bit of time to play with them and they don't wait till next year. So because it's a brand new stamp set, I take a white eraser over all of the stamped areas and I rub it. It takes off any manufacturing residue and helps that stamp to take the ink a little bit better. I'm going to use the largest of the 2 points that is in this set. And this is a layering stamp. And you can see when I position the second one, I don't position it quite right. I do fix it towards the end. This tag die I'm using is the largest of the framed tag dies, and there's an embossed line around the edges. So where it's not stamping around the edges is where that embossed line is. In order to avoid that area not being stamped, what would be a better way to do it would be to stamp this entire image first and then cut the tag out next. But I had these all pre-cut ahead of time so that I didn't have to stop in the middle of creating. When you're using these layered stamps, make sure to get your head right over top so you can see and make sure that they're stamped or they're positioned correctly. I didn't position this one correctly. I didn't want to put my head in front of the camera, and so it's off a little bit. I do fix it in a little bit, but just so you know that if you put your head right over top of the stamps, you're just going to have a better vantage point and you're going to be able to see better whether they are positioned correctly. I also think to do this another time, I would start from the center and probably go on my way out. I wanted this poinsettia positioned right in the center of the tag. So that's why I started with the big one. Having used this set now, I would start with the middle and then work my way out on the flower. I think that would be a better way to do it with this particular stamp set. I used 3 different colors of reds here. I used aged mahogany on the outside, lumberjack plaid on the middle layer, and then festive berries for the inner petals. And then I used fossilized amber for the center of the flower. I stamped one of the pieces of the center before I realized that this particular stamp set had 2 different stamps for the center of the flower. So once I did that, I went back and fixed it. It's not really going to show because I'm using those embellishments to go in the center of the flower anyways, but I wanted to have some color there just in case there were spaces in between the gems that I'm using and make sure that I didn't have just white cardstock behind it. Once I have the center of that petal done, I will go back and do the medium layer of flowers and fix that white space. It was really bothering me. At first I thought it might not make a difference, but it was really bothering me, so I went back in. You'll see that every single layer I'm stamping twice as well, just to make sure to get some nice bold color on here. Another way that I think this stamp could be used is a very similar way to the very first tree stamp I did, using a couple different colors for each layer, having a darker color towards the center of the flower, and then using an ink blending brush in order to remove that line and then get a little bit of shading in there. I think that would look really, really pretty as well. with that flower stamped, I'm taking it out of my Misti, and I'm going to add those gems. Now the ones I'm using here are very similar to the ones that I used on the tree at first, but these ones have cream colored pearls with a gold outline, and I think they're going to look nice in the center of this flower. There were so many different gems to choose from. There was also some gold rhinestones that were kind of a teardrop shape. If they were a round shape, I probably would have chosen those, but I thought the teardrop shape might have looked a little bit odd in the center of a poinsettia. So I chose these ones, and I like how they look. The gold around the edges is really pretty with the gold around the tag, and then I end up using a gold gel marker and outlining the edges of the poinsettia petals as well, just to get a little bit more gold in there and just add a little bit of metallic sparkle. It was looking a little bit flat, those petals, to me. So by adding the little line of gold in there, it just outlined, brightened that image, and tied all of those little gold elements there together. I do think this poinsettia would benefit from some greenery behind it, but the greenery in this stamp set is a sprig of berries as well as some holly sprigs, and I thought they wouldn't stamp completely anyways with those embossed lines on the side of the tag. So I chose a branch here. This is the branch that goes with the sprig of berries, and I thought by stamping it in gold, it would once again tie in those gold elements and just add a little bit of color, make that image not quite just one little blob in the bottom of the tag. So I stamped it several times. There's also a tiny little branch looking thing that is the veins in the holly, and I'm using that as well just to get a little bit of variation, as well as the fact that the branch from the berries only curved one way, and it looked a little odd on the bottom of the tag as well. I'm using a Brilliance gold ink pad for this. It's a pigment ink pad and it will dry on its own. I'm not bothering to heat emboss or to heat set it for this, because once I'm done with this tag, it's going to sit to the side for a little bit and it will have time to dry on its own. This stamp set that I'm using also has a ton of different sentiments to it. So once I have the image and those branches done, I'm going to take that gold pad and I'm going to stamp one of the sentiments on a piece of scrap cardstock, and then I'm going to take my tiny trimmer and trim it out and apply it to the bottom of the tag here. It just looked a little bit plain and lonely without having a sentiment on there. I actually originally stamped it in black thinking that that would show up over top of the poinsettia, but it really didn't show up very well. So by doing this and putting it on some white cardstock, it's going to show up nicely on top of that flower and really bring out that sentiment. And I think this also would have looked nice if it was embossed as well. I chose not to. I chose just to leave it flat, but it would be another way to enhance this. I'm taking some foam tape, putting that on the back of the sentiment, and then putting it on top of that poinsettia, just so it pops out a little bit, giving a little bit more dimension here. So I hope this gave a little bit of creative inspiration in looking for embellishments in unexpected places, as well as taking some time to get creative. It's very simple and easy to create different hand-stamped tags, and it's just a fun way to get those creative juices out during this busy season and take some time for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fabulous day.